And then if I just...
All right, good morning, everyone. Glad to be here today and give a update about drip potential spray coverage and some of the sprayer cleaning work we do in the last couple of weeks. So you all know nozzle selection is very important in terms of drift reduction and spray coverage. So I have a couple commonly used nozzle tips from TJ. So the droplet size could vary from very small, from fine driftable, real fine driftable droplets to ultra coarse TTI tips. So if you look at this big cockroach here, you could be spraying some real large droplets, say 400 microns, that fall into the very coarse droplet category. Or you could be spraying some real fine droplet, like stuff right here. Although the total volume of the droplets combined is the same as this droplet here, as this big old droplet, but you get much better coverage to kill that cockroach if you have to ensure the coverage if this is a contact insecticide. Now for herbicides, the droplet size and surface coverage also matter. If you're spraying a contact herbicide, which means that herbicide doesn't really move very well, now this is what you want. You want to cover the whole leaf as best you can. But if this is a systemic herbicide, which means they can get into the plant and be able to translocate and kill the weed, and then this one big old droplet, that's fine, because the herbicide will find a way to get inside the plant and kill it. That's the case for glyphosate, 2,4-D, dicamba, a couple other herbicides. Now, internationally, we categorize the droplet size by the micrometer of diameter. So for extremely fine droplets, we're talking about the diameter size smaller than 50 micrometers. And that goes all the way up to ultra coarse droplets, which are the droplets that has over 650 micrometer in diameter. And for every single nozzle tips out there, you always have a term called medium droplet size. So you always have about 50% of the spray droplets bigger than the medium droplet size, and you always have 50% of the droplets smaller than the medium droplet size. So every nozzle tip will create a combination of large droplets and smaller droplets. Sorry. So to visualize what I mean here, if you take a look at these 5 spray cards, so every single purple dot is a droplet that hits this water sensitive paper. So you can see the change from very fine droplet size, go higher to medium, to fine, medium, to medium coarse, very coarse, all the way up to very coarse and extremely coarse, actual coarse. You can see the coverage changed from good, decent coverage to average coverage to not so good coverage to very bad coverage. But the droplet size gets very bigger. You see very few, even for the very coarse or actual coarse droplets, you can still see some small dots like this one, that one, and this one. But the ratio of those small droplets decreased dramatically compared to this, because most of the droplets sprayed by a fine droplet nozzle, those droplets are going to be small. All right, so every single nozzle will produce some small droplets, but the ratio is quite different. There are some way to quantify the coverage. For instance, in this case, these 2 cards are actually the same card, because in the ImageA software, it will be able to calculate the blue dye and convert converts the picture to some numbers. So this card has 11.5% coverage, which means 11.5% of the spray card was covered by droplets. Now, how does that change across the nozzle type? So Dr. Ferguson tested a couple nozzle tips, and he come up with this information here. If you look at fine droplet nozzles like XR tips, or if you look at some other tips that produce medium droplet size, these two produce medium droplets. These two produce coarse. This one produce very coarse, and that one produce extreme to ultra coarse droplets. So the y-axis is the percentage of coverage on the drift card or the spray card. So the fine droplets give you the best coverage overall, followed by the medium droplet size and a coarse droplet size, and then followed by very coarse and extremely coarse droplet size. So everything started to make sense here. Also, another factor I want to emphasize is the spray output. We always tell people you need to spray at least 10 gallons per acre minimum to ensure coverage. Now here is why. Dr. Ferguson tested 8 different nozzle tips at 0.2 and 0.3 size, which means at 40 psi, each nozzle tip will spray 0.2 or 0.3 gallon per acre. You can see the y-axis, it remains to be the percentage of coverage. You can see if we bump up the spray output from 5.3 gallon to 8 gallon to 10.3 gallon per acre, every increase of output will cause a significant increase of percentage of coverage, and that is true for every single nozzles. That means you get a better coverage every time you put more water in the tank because the data you see here, all right, and that's true for every single nozzles. All right, take a look at some pictures right here. For XR tip that produce a fine droplets, 5.35 gallon per acre, 8 gallon per acre, and 10.7 gallon per acre, you can tell the difference even by a visual inspection. All right, it doesn't really take a software to figure out that conclusion. For a coarse spray droplet size tip like this MD 11002, we see the same trend. For the extreme coarse spray, this droplet, this nozzle, the AI 11002 doesn't give you very good coverage overall, but it still responds to the increase of spray output. So you probably want to stick with minimum 10.7 or 10 gallon per acre to get you a decent coverage with that tip. This was the demonstration we did last year at UV Smith. So basically, we spray TDI tip. So that's the same droplet size at 110.025 at 5 mile per hour at 15 gallon per acre. So this is 0.25 tip at a slower speed versus a 0.5 tip at a higher speed. Now, looks on paper, these two spray settings are pretty equal to each other. You have a small tip only spray 0.25 gallon per minute, but you drive at a slower speed, versus you have a bigger tip spray 2 times amount of the output, but you drive the spray mill at a higher speed, and they both spray 15 gallon per acre. However, if you look at a drift card or the spray card, this one certainly produced better coverage compared to these. I can't explain why, but that means if you slow down some, you're going to get better weed control or coverage. For AI TTJ 60, we did a same comparison, 0.25 tip at 5 mile per hour, 15 gallon per acre, and then same output, spray at 10 mile per hour, use 0.5 tips, bigger tips, and then similar results. better coverage with a smaller tip but drive at a slower speed. So how does that translate to weed control? That's the comparison I showed you just 2 slides ago. TTI, bigger tip, drove at a faster speed, doesn't control the grasses very well, versus a smaller tip, spray at a lower speed, same output, control the grasses better. That was Liberty, a contact herbicide. All right. So you could getting some good benefit by driving slow and increase the output of your sprayer to get a better weed control. Now, I'm also going to show some work that Dr. Ferguson did in Australia because we saw lots of data came from indoor wind tunnels. So this is one of wind tunnels in Queensland, University of Queensland. This is how they test for drift or the setup they do drift type of work. So they will have the wind blowing this way across these strings, and they set up a few strings inside the wind tunnel, and then they will have a nozzle here spray in the wind, and the wind is going deeper into the tunnel. So the strings are probably a couple feet downwind, inside the other side of that picture. They will spray fluorescent dye, and then after the application, they will, use the a special flashlight to show the coverage of those dyes on the strings, and then they will harvest the strings, extract the fluorescent dye in the lab, and analyze by a spectral fluorophotometer. And then they will be able to calculate the drift potential, use this mathematical formula, because they know the diameter of the line, the distance between the line, the amount of dye they recover, and numbers of lines, things like that. So their data shows that if you use a coarse droplet nozzle instead of using a fine nozzle, you will reduce up to 82% of the drift from here, from the red bar, down to this TADF or the purple bar here. So you will reduce 82% of the drift if you go from the red to the purple, or from the fine to coarse. 70% drift reduction from medium to coarse droplets. All these 3 droplets here produce coarse droplets. All right, so that's a 70% drift reduction. That's how a nozzle tip could change the drift potential during a spray application. As a summary, I'm pretty impressed with this number here to figure out. For every 2.7 gallon per acre increase in volume rate or increase in your spray volume, you will increase your coverage by 9%. So that's why Bayer guys always tell their growers, the more volume you can spray, the more water you can put in the tank, the better your Liberty works, because Liberty is a $20 per acre herbicide. You certainly want a herbicide work better because the price you pay. Also, I'm going to talk about some of our sprayer cleaning study, and I have to really appreciate E.V. Smith station for their support in this project. So we tested 3 large self-propelled sprayer. One is a John Deere 6700. It's an old sprayer, but still lots of people use it on farm. We also tested Spray Coupe 4660. Both of these sprayers have about 400 or 500 gallon tank. And this Haggy really has the largest tank among all 3. This one has an over 1,000 gallon tank. All right. So it takes a lot of effort and water to rinse all 3 sprayers. So we mix 240 or dicamba in the tank, and then we mix 1 pint per acre at a 10 gallon per acre output in the tank, and then we spray the mixture on pasture and fallow land, and then we cleaned every herbicide, every treatment 4 times, repeated 3 times. So that is a loss of time and effort. So in each rain cycle, like in this picture here, we collect rainseed from 2 ends of the boom and from the center of the boom. So every rain cycle, we collect 3 individual samples, and then everything was analyzed by HPLC in the lab, and we were able to detect 2,4-D and dicamba as low as 0.025 parts per million. So some preliminary results showed that Haiti retained more 2,4-D and dicamba residues than Spray Coupe and John Deere 6700, which is not a surprise because it does have the largest tank compared to the other 2 sprayer. So we expected that this Haiti sprayer would retain most of the residual, because there are lots of space these spray residues can hide beneath the tank. And also, dicamba seems to be harder to clean out the sprayer than 2,4-D for some reason. We tested the old formulation, so we use the steering glue, which is DGA dicamba and 2,4-D amine, because we do not have access to the new formulation in that much of quantity, because we need to use a lot of herbicide during the rains experiment. So the residuals were found in rainseed in all 4 rinses. So this is different compared to the data from Mississippi State and Tennessee. So in Mississippi State, they tested a John Deere 6700, and they said after triple rains, they did not find any dicamba residue. And certainly that's different from our results here in Auburn. But this could be because we were using the old formulation, which were harder to be cleaned out of the sprayer. So we plan to repeat this experiment later in the fall during the winter time, and when the new formulation of dicamba and 2,4-D, I mean the extended max in this deal, are available in the chemical retail store. So that concludes my presentation today, and I welcome anybody ask question. You can call me or email me your question, or whichever you prefer. Thank you.
Steve, practically, how I always do the same thing as far as killing insects, especially when we're in the sugarcane even, where you really need good coverage on their feeding on the underside of the leaves. Practically, what's sort of the maximum gallons per acre you think farmers are willing to go?
You say minimum or minimum?
Maximum.
Maximum? Oof.
You know, because you're saying the more the better, and I totally agree, but, 20? Does anybody do 20?
Well, not many farmers spray 20 gallons per acre for a very simple reason. They always try to spray as many acreage as possible. Mm-hmm. So if they reduce the gallon per acre number, they will be able to spray more acres with less refills into the tank. They don't have to mix them that many times compared to.
So it's always a trade-off.
So there's always trade-off. But I think if you really emphasize the importance of coverage, and the farmers really have lots of sugarcane aphids in the field he's trying to kill, maybe he'll spray 20 gallons per acre. But realistically, I don't think there would be many people who would go higher than 20, because that's already a lot from the farmer perspective. Mm-hmm. And then from research perspective, if you go higher than 20 or 30 gallons per acre output, I mean, you will create a really good coverage, but at the same time, you will be spraying or causing lots of drift. So good percentage of your chemical is actually going to move off the field if there's wind during your application. So you have to run some research trial looking into that, if that extra amount of water in the tank will actually decrease your insect control, because you're simply putting out too much out there. And there's another debate that if the concentration in the droplet, in the spray droplets, is really low because you put just too much volume out. Is that really going to be enough to kill the insects or the weeds? I don't know too much about insecticide, but I can tell you for weeds, if you don't have that contrast of the concentration on the leaf versus inside the leaf, the diffusion for herbicide to get into the plants are not going to be too good. So, but there are several things you have to consider. It can get fairly complicated, if you want to go deeper in that route.
Yeah, but I like that rule of thumb now. Tell me it again. It was for every 2.7 gallons per acre, you increase it 9%.
Yes.
Which is pretty useful thing to remember.
Yes, I never seen that number before.
I'd never seen that. I was writing it down, so very interesting.
Thank you, man.
All right.